The night did not announce itself as unusual. In rural West Texas, early morning hours often arrive quietly, without markers beyond the thinning traffic and the long stretches of highway where little changes from mile to mile. On August 9, 2013, that quiet was interrupted by something small and ordinary in form. A call placed to emergency services. A request for help. A few recorded minutes that would later become central to a case defined not by what happened next, but by what did not. The 911 call is real. It exists in official records. It was placed by a man identified as Brandon Mason Lawson, 26 years old, traveling near the town of Bronte in Coke County, Texas. The call was brief. Portions of the audio were unclear. Some words were difficult to interpret, and no definitive official transcript has ever resolved every phrase with certainty. What can be said, without speculation, is that the call requested police assistance. It signaled a problem serious enough to involve emergency response. And it marked the last confirmed moment of direct contact with Brandon Lawson. Emergency calls are usually the beginning of a sequence. A report is made, responders arrive, a situation unfolds. In this case, the sequence stopped almost as soon as it began. Law enforcement moved toward the area indicated by the call. The response followed standard procedure, shaped by distance and geography. U.S. Highway 277 runs south of Bronte through open land, with long intervals between intersections and few nearby structures. At that hour, traffic is light, witnesses are rare. The landscape does not preserve movement well. When officers arrived, they found Brandon Lawson's pickup truck approximately 4 miles south of Bronte, on Highway 277. The vehicle was partially in the roadway. It was not hidden, it was not severely damaged. There were no confirmed signs of a collision. The truck was simply there, stopped in a position that required attention. Brandon Lawson was not. This is the first fixed point in the case. The truck's location is documented. Its position on the highway is known. From that moment forward, nearly every part of the investigation would return to this spot, directly or indirectly. It became the physical anchor around which all later questions would turn. The absence was immediate and unambiguous. There was no confirmed sighting of Brandon at the scene. No verified witness reported seeing him leave the vehicle. No confirmed evidence placed him walking away along the roadway or across the surrounding land. The area around Highway 277 at that location is rural and open. In daylight, it stretches outward with little obstruction. At night, it becomes defined by darkness and distance. The lack of witnesses did not imply secrecy. It reflected the nature of the place. The 911 call and the abandoned truck formed a narrow frame. Everything known about the disappearance had to fit within it. The call suggested urgency, but not clarity. The truck suggested a stop, but not a cause. Together, they established a mystery built on missing information rather than dramatic action. From the beginning, investigators were careful with language. There was no immediate narrative imposed on the scene. There was no confirmed explanation for why the truck had stopped. There was no confirmed explanation for why Brandon was not there when officers arrived. The facts remained minimal and precise. This restraint mattered. In many cases, early assumptions shaped the course of an investigation. Here, there was little to assume from. The truck did not tell a story on its own. It marked a point in time. Before that point, Brandon was alive and moving through the world. After it, his location was unknown. The rural setting played a quiet role in shaping the case. Highway 277 is not a place of constant observation. It connects towns rather than hosting them. At night, it becomes a corridor of movement rather than a destination. When something goes wrong in such places, it can go unnoticed without any intent behind that invisibility. This was not a scene defined by chaos. There were no confirmed signs of violence. No confirmed debris scattered across the road. No confirmed trail leading away from the vehicle. The stillness itself became part of the problem. There was nothing to follow. As word spread that a vehicle had been found abandoned and its driver was missing, attention focused on the small window of time between the call and the discovery of the truck. This window would later be described as narrow. It did not stretch across days or weeks. It existed within hours, possibly less. That compression intensified the mystery. How does someone disappear so completely in such a short span, leaving behind a vehicle on an open highway? The case did not begin with a dramatic confrontation or a visible crime scene. It began with a pause, a stopped truck, an unanswered question, a call that did not fully explain itself. From the outside, the elements appear simple. A man traveling at night, an emergency call, a vehicle found, a person missing. But simplicity in structure does not guarantee clarity in outcome. In fact, it often hides the opposite. When there are few details, each one carries more weight. Each unanswered question becomes larger. The truck would remain where it was found, at least as a point of reference. Investigators would return to its location repeatedly, both physically and conceptually. The road did not move. The coordinates did not change. What changed over time was the meaning assigned to that still image of a vehicle on an empty highway. For Brandon Lawson's family, the call represented a final connection. For investigators, it represented a starting point with limited direction. For the community, it marked the beginning of a case that resisted easy explanation. Nothing about the opening moments suggested how long the uncertainty would last. At the time, the focus was immediate. Find Brandon. Understand what happened between the call and the arrival. Determine whether he was nearby, injured, or simply out of sight. Those questions would remain open far longer than anyone expected. At the start, all that was known could be stated in a few lines. A man placed a call for help. His truck was found on a rural highway. He was not with it. Everything else waited to be discovered, or not discovered at all. This was the foundation of the case. Not an explosion of facts, but a quiet absence that refused to fill itself in. Before the early morning hours of August 9, 2013, narrowed his life to a single phone call and a stopped truck, Brandon Mason Lawson lived within routines that were ordinary and well established. He was 26 years old. He worked in the oil field. He was a father. These facts are simple, but they matter because they place him firmly inside a life that was active, demanding, and connected to other people. Brandon's work in the oil field shaped much of his daily structure. Oil field jobs in West Texas are often physically demanding and require long hours. Travel between sites and towns is common, and driving late at night is not unusual. This kind of work creates a rhythm that blends labor and movement, with highways serving as links between shifts, responsibilities, and home. For Brandon, travel on Texas roads was not exceptional. It was part of the routine. Family was another constant in his life. Publicly available information identifies him as a father, a role that carries obligations and anchors people to schedules and expectations. There is no verified record suggesting he was detached from those responsibilities or planning to abandon them. His life, as it appears to confirmed facts, shows continuity rather than withdrawal. There is also no documented evidence that Brandon was preparing to disappear. No confirmed reports of packed belongings left behind. No verified communications indicating plans to leave permanently. No official statements describing intentions to start over elsewhere. These absences of evidence are important, not because they prove anything on their own, but because they limit what can responsibly be said about his mindset or direction before the night he vanished. The geography of Brandon's life placed him in and around small West Texas communities, where distances between towns are measured in miles of open road rather than blocks of streets. Highways like U.S. Highway 277 are functional spaces. They are not destinations. They are routes people take because they need to be somewhere else. For someone working in the oil field, these roads become familiar, even unremarkable. This familiarity matters when considering the disappearance. Brandon was not traveling through an unfamiliar region under unusual circumstances. He was moving within an environment that matched his work and daily life. Nothing in the confirmed record suggests he was out of place or acting outside his normal patterns simply by being on the road that night. Public discussions of the case have sometimes drifted toward speculation about stress or personal challenges. What can be said based on the case memory pack is limited. While personal challenges are common in many lives, there is no verified evidence tying such factors directly to Brandon's disappearance. Without documented statements or official findings, these elements remain background context rather than explanatory factors. What stands out in Brandon's life before the disappearance is its ordinariness. He was not a public figure. He was not known for risky behavior that would clearly explain a sudden vanishing. He was part of a working population that often operates outside standard office hours, moving through spaces that are quiet, dark, and sparsely populated, especially at night. Routine can sometimes mask vulnerability. When travel at night becomes normal, it no longer feels like a risk. When long stretches of empty road are familiar, their isolation fades into the background. This does not mean danger is expected. It means it is not actively anticipated. For Brandon, nighttime driving through rural Texas was part of the landscape of his life, not a deviation from it. There is also no indication that the night of August 8th leading into August 9th began differently from other nights. The case memory pack does not include verified reports of unusual behavior earlier that evening. No confirmed arguments. No documented emergencies before the call. The disappearance did not announce itself in advance. This absence of warning signs has shaped how the case has been remembered. It resists narratives that rely on buildup or foreshadowing. Instead, it forces attention onto the moment when normal continuity broke. One moment, Brandon was moving through his life. The next confirmed moment, he was asking for help. Between those 2 points, the record is thin. Understanding Brandon's life does not explain his disappearance. It does something quieter. It narrows the field of responsible interpretation. It removes the option of attributing the case to obvious preparation or clear intent. It reinforces the idea that whatever happened occurred within a short window, rather than being the result of a long, visible process. For investigators and for those who later studied the case, this made the disappearance harder to contextualize. When someone with an unstable or erratic history vanishes, certain explanations can be explored early. In Brandon's case, his life offered no such immediate pathways. The investigation had to start from the ground up, anchored only to physical evidence and documented actions. The abandoned pickup truck on Highway 277 would eventually become the central physical reference point. But before that, Brandon existed as a person with a job, a family, and a routine that placed him on the road without drawing attention. That context does not solve the mystery. It defines its boundaries. His life before the disappearance matters because it establishes what was lost, but also because it frames the disappearance as an interruption rather than a conclusion. There is no verified evidence that Brandon's life was closing or changing direction in a way that would make his sudden absence expected. The interruption was abrupt. This is why the case has endured. It is not only about where Brandon went after the call. It is about how someone embedded in an ordinary working life could vanish so completely within such a limited span of time. The ordinariness of his life does not diminish the mystery, it deepens it. When the investigation later turned toward timelines, searches, and theories, Brandon's background remained a quiet constant. He was not someone who disappeared from the margins. He disappeared from the middle of a life that appeared to be moving forward, following familiar paths. In that sense, his life before the highway went quiet is not just background. It is part of the tension. It stands in contrast to the uncertainty that followed. It reminds listeners that the disappearance did not emerge from chaos, but from routine. That contrast would shape every stage of the case that came next.
The night Brandon Lawson disappeared did not stretch outward with dramatic turns or visible escalation. It narrowed, It compressed into a limited span of time marked by a few confirmed points and a wide space between them where certainty could not follow. On the night of August 8th into the early hours of August 9th, 2013, Brandon was traveling by pickup truck near Bronte, Texas. This much is established. He was on familiar roads, in a region shaped by long distances and open land. In this part of Coke County, highways function as connectors rather than destinations. Movement through them is routine, especially for people whose work requires irregular hours and frequent travel. At some point during that night, Brandon's pickup truck came to a stop along US Highway 277, approximately 4 miles south of Bronte. The exact reason the vehicle stopped has never been conclusively established in the official record. What is known is that it did stop, and that the stop preceded the last confirmed contact Brandon had with anyone. That contact came in the form of a 911 call. The call itself has been described consistently in one respect and inconsistently in others. It was a request for police assistance. It was brief. Portions of the audio were unclear. Some words were difficult to interpret, and the lack of a definitive official transcript has left certain phrases unresolved. What matters for the timeline is not what the call might have meant in full, but what it represents factually. It marks the final moment when Brandon's voice entered a system that records and preserves time. After the call ended, the clock began to work against clarity. Law enforcement responded to the area associated with the call. The response followed standard procedures shaped by rural geography. Distances are greater. Reference points are fewer. Nighttime visibility is limited. These conditions do not imply delay or error. They describe the environment in which the response occurred. When officers arrived along Highway 277, they found Brandon Lawson's pickup truck. The vehicle was partially in the roadway. It was not concealed. It was not severely damaged. There were no confirmed signs of a collision. The truck's presence suggested a stop rather than an impact. It required attention because of its position, but it did not present an obvious explanation. Brandon was not with the vehicle. This moment represents the sharpest narrowing of the case. Before the call, Brandon was moving through space. After the call, his truck was stationary. Between those two conditions lies a gap that has never been fully filled by evidence. There were no confirmed witnesses who reported seeing Brandon at the roadside when officers arrived. No verified accounts of him walking along the highway. No confirmed trail leading away from the truck. The surrounding area consisted of open land typical of rural West Texas, where terrain does not easily record passage unless someone or something leaves a clear trace. The absence of physical evidence at the scene was immediate. Investigators did not find items that clearly indicated where Brandon went or what he did after stopping the vehicle. The truck itself became the most concrete element of the night. Its location could be measured. Its position could be photographed. Everything else was defined by what could not be found. The window of time between the 911 call and the discovery of the empty truck was narrow. It did not span days or even a full night. It existed within a relatively short period, making the lack of observable movement more difficult to explain. In many missing person cases, time allows for dispersion. Here, time was limited, yet the outcome was complete absence. This compression has remained one of the most persistent features of the case. The shorter the window, the fewer opportunities there should be for someone to disappear without leaving evidence. And yet, that is precisely what occurred. It is important to note what is not confirmed. There is no verified timeline that places Brandon walking away from the vehicle in a specific direction. There is no confirmed evidence that another vehicle was involved. There is no confirmed interaction with another person at the scene. The record does not support conclusions beyond these limits. The silence of the highway at that hour is often noted, but it should be understood neutrally. Rural roads at night are frequently empty. This emptiness does not imply secrecy or concealment. It reflects population density and timing. The lack of witnesses was not unusual. What was unusual was the result. As the initial response concluded and the reality of Brandon's absence became clear, the focus shifted from immediate assistance to search and reconstruction. But on that night, the sequence ended where it began. A call, a response, a truck, no person. The truck's presence anchored the case to a specific location. It also anchored it to a specific question. How does a person move from a stopped vehicle to complete disappearance in such a short time on an open highway without confirmed evidence of where they went? This question would drive the investigation forward, but on the night itself, it remained unanswered. Officers documented the scene. The truck was accounted for. The time of the call was logged. These actions created a record, but they did not create clarity. What followed the discovery was not resolution, but transition. The case moved from an emergency response to a missing person investigation. The urgency remained, but the certainty did not increase. Each hour that passed without a confirmed sighting widened the gap between what was known and what could be inferred. The rural environment contributed to this widening gap. Open land does not offer the same constraints as urban spaces. Movement can occur without being observed. At the same time, the absence of obstacles does not guarantee movement leaves a trace. The land can absorb presence without recording it. This dynamic would later shape many discussions of the case. But on the night Brandon disappeared, it simply meant that there was nowhere obvious to look first. The abandoned pickup truck remained on Highway 277 as the last known point of contact between Brandon and the physical world investigators could document. It was both a starting point and a stopping point. Before it, Brandon was moving. After it, he was unaccounted for. The call that preceded it did not provide enough information to close that gap. The response that followed did not find what the call suggested might be there. And so the night ended not with a conclusion, but with an open question suspended in place. As dawn approached, the case entered a new phase. The emergency aspect faded. The investigative aspect began, but the events of the night itself remained fixed in their simplicity. A man traveled, a truck stopped, a call was made, the truck was found, the man was gone. That sequence has never changed. In the years that followed, theories would emerge, searches would expand, and new information would eventually come to light. But none of that alters the core structure of the night. It remains defined by a narrow window and a wide absence. Understanding this night does not require speculation. It requires restraint. The facts do not support a detailed narrative of movement or intent. They support a quiet acknowledgement of limits. There is only so much that can be said with certainty. What can be said is this: on a rural highway near Bronte, Texas, in the early hours of August 9, 2013, Brandon Lawson's presence in the world became reduced to what he left behind: a recorded call, a stationary vehicle, and a space where he should have been. Everything else came later.
Morning did not bring clarity. It brought light, which revealed the same absence that officers encountered in the dark hours before. The pickup truck remained where it had been found along U.S. Highway 277, roughly 4 miles south of Bronte. The driver was still missing. What had been an emergency response during the night now became the beginning of an investigation shaped by limits rather than leads. Law enforcement secured the area around the truck and began systematic efforts to determine what had happened. The position of the vehicle was documented. Its condition was noted. There were no confirmed signs of a collision. No obvious damage that would explain a sudden stop caused by impact. The truck itself did not suggest a violent event. It suggested interruption. Officers expanded their focus outward from the vehicle. Searches were conducted in the surrounding rural area, guided by standard procedures for a missing person case. In this part of West Texas, the environment is defined by openness. Fields extend without clear boundaries. Landmarks are sparse. At night, this geography absorbs movement. In daylight, it offers visibility but little guidance about where to look first. The lack of immediate physical evidence became apparent quickly. Investigators did not locate items near the truck that clearly belonged to Brandon and indicated a direction of travel. There were no confirmed tracks leading away from the roadway. No verified signs of a struggle. The scene did not provide a narrative. It provided a question. The 911 call remained central to early efforts. It was the last confirmed point of contact and the only direct signal of distress. Investigators reviewed what was available, aware of its limitations. Portions of the audio were unclear. Some words could not be reliably interpreted. Without a definitive official transcript that resolved every phrase, the call could not serve as a precise map of events. It could only confirm that Brandon had requested help and that the request preceded his disappearance. This ambiguity shaped the investigation from the beginning. When a call provides clear information, it can direct responders toward specific actions. In this case, it did not. The call established urgency without detail. It marked time without describing place beyond the general area. Investigators had to work from physical reality rather than spoken explanation. Search efforts reflected this reality. Law enforcement canvassed areas accessible from the highway. The surrounding land was examined to the extent possible. These efforts were constrained by scale. Rural searches require prioritization, and without a clear direction or confirmed movement, prioritization becomes guesswork. Investigators were cautious about over-interpreting the absence of evidence as evidence of absence. As hours turned into days, the investigation shifted from immediate response to broader inquiry. The case was now officially a missing person investigation. Attention turned to reconstructing Brandon Lawson's last known movements before the truck was found. This reconstruction depended on confirmed facts rather than assumptions. He had been traveling by pickup truck. He had placed a 911 call. His truck was located on Highway 277. He was not present when officers arrived. Community awareness grew as the situation became clear. In and around Bronte, news spread that a local man had vanished after his vehicle was found abandoned on a rural highway. Such cases resonate in small communities, not because they are common, but because they disrupt a sense of predictability. Highways are familiar. Disappearances from them are not. Despite this attention, the investigation did not produce immediate breakthroughs. There were no publicly confirmed suspects. No verified reports placed Brandon with another person at the time of his disappearance. No confirmed sightings emerged after the night he vanished. Each lead that might have provided direction ended without confirmation. Investigators also face the challenge of time. The longer a person remains missing, the more variables expand. Weather changes, landscapes shift, memories fade. Early investigative momentum is critical, but it must be guided by evidence. In this case, evidence was minimal. The abandoned pickup truck remained the central reference point. It anchored the investigation geographically and temporally. Everything known about Brandon's disappearance intersected with that location. Searches began there. Theories returned there. Questions circled around why the truck stopped and what happened immediately afterward. Yet the truck could only offer so much. It did not explain why Brandon left it, if he did. It did not explain where he went. It did not explain what prevented him from being present when officers arrived. It was a silent object, fixed in place, offering no interpretation of events. Investigators documented what they could and acknowledged what they could not. This restraint is often misunderstood outside of law enforcement. From the outside, unanswered questions can feel like missed opportunities. From the inside, they are often reflections of reality. When evidence does not exist, it cannot be forced into being. As days passed without a confirmed sighting, concern deepened. Search efforts continued, but the scope of the area and the lack of direction made comprehensive coverage difficult. Rural searches are not limited by walls or streets. They are limited by time, manpower, and the sheer scale of land. The case began to show signs of stalling early, not because of inaction, but because of scarcity. There was little new information to pursue. Each day without progress narrowed the options for what could reasonably be done next. Public attention remained, but it was accompanied by uncertainty. Without clear answers, speculation began to fill gaps in conversation, though not in the official record. Investigators remained bound to what could be verified. They did not publicly confirm theories that lacked evidence. They did not identify suspects without cause. This phase of the investigation established patterns that would persist. The case would move forward slowly. It would be defined by what could not be confirmed as much as by what could. The environment would remain a factor. The lack of witnesses would remain a limitation. By the end of the initial investigative period, several facts were firmly established and unchanged. Brandon Lawson was missing. His pickup truck had been found abandoned on Highway 277. He'd placed a 911 call before disappearing. No physical evidence at the scene explained where he went or why. These facts became the foundation for everything that followed. They also marked the end of the case's first phase. The emergency response was over. The immediate search had not succeeded. The investigation would now have to adapt to a longer timeline. In many cases, the early days defined the trajectory. Here, they defined the constraints. The investigation was not propelled by discovery, it was shaped by absence. That absence would echo through every subsequent stage, from public discussion to cold case classification. The rural highway remained quiet. The truck was no longer just a vehicle. It had become a marker of uncertainty. A place where action stopped and questions began.
As the initial investigation failed to produce clear answers, the case of Brandon Lawson began to move into a different phase. The urgency of the first days gave way to analysis. Attention shifted from searching the landscape to examining possibilities. This is the point in many investigations where theories emerge. Not because evidence demands them, but because the absence of evidence leaves space that feels impossible to leave empty. The facts of the case had not changed. Brandon Lawson had been traveling near Bronte, Texas on the night of August 8 to 9th, 2013. He had placed a 911 call requesting assistance. His pickup truck had been found partially in the roadway on US Highway 277, roughly 4 miles south of town. He was not present when officers arrived. No confirmed sightings followed. These anchors remained fixed. What began to change was interpretation, with no immediate physical evidence to explain Brandon's disappearance. Investigators and the public alike were left to consider how such an absence could occur. The rural environment became central to these discussions. West Texas highways run through wide stretches of open land. Movement can occur without witnesses. Distance can obscure timing. In theory, these conditions allow for many explanations. In practice, they complicate verification. One line of thinking focused on the moment the truck stopped. Why had it come to rest where it did? The vehicle was not wrecked. There were no confirmed signs of mechanical failure documented in the case memory pack. The stop itself remained unexplained. This lack of explanation invited speculation. If the truck was operable, why was it abandoned? If it was not, why were there no clear indicators? Another area of focus was the 911 call. The call was real, but its unclear audio created room for interpretation. Without a definitive official transcript resolving every phrase, listeners and commentators sometimes heard different things in the same recording. This ambiguity became fertile ground for competing narratives. However, from an investigative standpoint, ambiguity is not evidence. Investigators were limited to what could be reliably established. The call confirmed distress and timing. It did not confirm cause. Some theories attempted to connect the call directly to the environment. The idea that Brandon may have left the truck voluntarily to seek help or move away from danger was considered in general terms. The rural landscape made such movement possible. But possibility is not confirmation. No physical evidence at the scene supported a specific direction of travel. No confirmed trail was documented. The land did not provide a map. Other discussions revolved around the involvement of another person or vehicle. This line of thought often arises when a disappearance seems to complete. Yet, the case memory pack contains no verified evidence of another individual being present at the scene. No confirmed witness reports. No physical signs of an encounter. Without such evidence, investigators could not elevate this idea beyond speculation. The truck itself remained central throughout these discussions. It became the constant reference point against which theories were measured. Any explanation had to account for its position on Highway 277, its condition, and the narrow window of time between the call and the arrival of law enforcement. The more elaborate a theory became, the harder it was to reconcile with those fixed facts. As time passed, some theories were examined and then quietly set aside, not because they were disproven in dramatic fashion, but because they could not be supported. This process rarely leaves a clear trail. It happens through the slow accumulation of negative findings, searches that find nothing, interviews that do not align, leads that dissolve under scrutiny. This gradual elimination can be frustrating to observers. It can feel like stagnation, but in reality, it is part of narrowing the field. Each theory that cannot be supported reduces the range of possibilities, even if it does not point directly to an answer. Public interest played a role during this phase. As awareness of the case spread beyond the immediate community, discussion expanded. People unfamiliar with the geography or the investigative limits sometimes proposed explanations that sounded compelling but were disconnected from the facts. These discussions often returned to the same unresolved elements: the call, the truck, the absence. Investigators, however, remained constrained by what could be verified. No publicly confirmed suspects emerged. No theory reached the threshold required for formal action. This restraint is often misunderstood as inactivity. In reality, it reflects the boundary between investigation and assumption. The rural terrain continued to complicate matters. Searches could not reasonably cover every possible path or area. The lack of direction made comprehensive coverage impracticable. Over time, this reality forced a shift from active searching to periodic review. This shift marked a subtle but important change. The case did not end. It slowed. Efforts became more focused on re-evaluating known information rather than uncovering new physical evidence. Theories were revisited, timelines were examined again, but without new data, conclusions remained elusive. Throughout this phase, the abandoned pickup truck retained its symbolic and practical importance. It was the point where certainty stopped. It represented the last moment when Brandon's location was known. Every theory, no matter how complex, eventually had to return to that simple image: a vehicle on an empty highway, no driver in sight. This was the angle at which the case turned inward. Instead of moving outward into discovery, it began to circle around the same facts. This circular motion is characteristic of cases that lack a decisive breakthrough. They do not progress linearly. They orbit for Brandon Lawson's case. This orbit lasted years. False leads are not always dramatic. They do not always involve named suspects or sensational claims. Often, they are quieter, They are ideas that seem plausible until they are examined closely. They are paths that lead somewhere, just not where the case needs to go. In this case, the absence of conclusive evidence meant that many ideas remained in a grey area, not proven, not fully ruled out, but insufficient to drive action. This grey area can be unsettling. It creates the impression that answers are just out of reach. Over time, this phase contributed to the case transitioning into a cold case. The initial urgency faded, the flow of new information slowed. Public attention became intermittent rather than constant. The investigation did not stop, but it entered a holding pattern. The truck on Highway 277 remained unchanged in significance. It did not gain new meaning. It did not lose relevance. It simply stayed, a fixed point in a story defined by movements that could not be traced. This stage of the case illustrates a difficult truth about missing person investigations. Not every question can be answered with the information available. Not every disappearance yields a narrative that feels complete or satisfying. Sometimes the process consists of ruling out what cannot be supported and accepting what cannot yet be explained. For those closest to the case, this period was marked by waiting. Waiting for new leads, waiting for technology to advance, waiting for someone to come forward. For investigators, it was marked by periodic reassessment and restraint. The false leads and unproven theories did not solve the case, but they shaped its path. They defined what it was not, even as they failed to define what it was. In the absence of answers, the case settled into memory. The highway remained, the truck remained in records and photographs, the call remained on file. Brandon Lawson remained missing. This phase did not bring resolution, it brought endurance. The case continued not because it was active in a conventional sense, but because its core questions were still unanswered. The angle shifted here, from pursuit to persistence, from searching the land to waiting for something new to emerge. And something eventually would. But for a long time, all that existed were theories that could not be proven. Leads that went nowhere, and a single silent object on a rural Texas highway that refused to explain itself. Time does not announce when a case becomes cold. There is no single moment when urgency ends and distance begins. Instead, there is a gradual shift measured in unanswered calls, slowed searches, and the quiet recognition that the immediate phase has passed without resolution. For the disappearance of Brandon Lawson, this shift came not with a declaration, but with accumulation. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and the central facts remained unchanged. After the initial searches and early investigative efforts failed to locate Brandon or produce new evidence, the case entered a period defined by waiting. Law enforcement continued to hold the case open, but without fresh leads, activity naturally slowed. This was not abandonment, it was reality. Investigations depend on information. When no new information arrives, there is little to act upon. The rural setting continued to shape this phase. The land surrounding Highway 277 did not change in ways that revealed answers. Seasons passed over the same open terrain that had yielded nothing in the first days. Weather altered the surface. Time altered the context. But neither produced clarity. The landscape absorbed the event without preserving its explanation. For Brandon's family, the passage of time carried a different weight. The absence did not fade simply because days passed. Each new week extended uncertainty. Each new month reinforced the gap between what was known and what remained unanswered. Publicly available information confirms the long duration of this uncertainty, but does not detail private experience. What can be said, factually, is that the case remained unresolved for years. As the months turned into years, the disappearance became part of the background of the community. In small towns and rural counties, unresolved cases do not vanish from memory, but they do settle into it. The initial shock recedes. Routine resumes. The highway continues to carry traffic. The absence remains, but it becomes less visible in daily life. Public attention followed a similar pattern. Periodically, the case resurfaced through media coverage or anniversaries. Each reappearance brought renewed focus on the same fixed elements. The 911 call, the abandoned truck, the lack of confirmed sightings. These moments did not introduce new facts. They re-examined existing ones. They reminded people that the questions were still open. From an investigative standpoint, the case transitioned into what is commonly described as a cold case. This designation does not imply closure. It indicates that active investigative steps have slowed due to the absence of new evidence. Files remain open. Records remain accessible. But progress becomes dependent on something external to the original scene, a tip, a discovery, a technological advance. During this period, the investigation became more about preservation than pursuit. Evidence already collected had to be maintained. Records had to remain intact. The possibility of future developments required readiness rather than action. This posture can appear passive, but it is deliberate. It keeps the case viable for as long as necessary. Technology is often discussed in the context of cold cases, but it does not advance on a schedule aligned with individual investigations. Over the years following Brandon Lawson's disappearance, general forensic and investigative tools continued to evolve. However, without new material to analyze, these advances could not be immediately applied. The case required something more fundamental. It required new evidence. The abandoned pickup truck continued to exist as a documented object rather than a living scene. Its role did not diminish, remained the last confirmed physical link to Brandon's whereabouts. In reports and discussions, it was still referenced as the point where certainty ended. Even as time passed, that anchor did not shift. The 911 call retained similar significance. It remained the last recorded interaction involving Brandon. Its unclear portions were still unclear. No new interpretation emerged that could transform it into a decisive clue. It continued to serve as a marker of time and distress, not as a solution. As years accumulated, the case took on an additional layer of complexity. Memory faded. Witnesses who might have noticed something unusual along Highway 277 that night became harder to locate or less certain of details. This is a natural effect of time. It does not imply neglect. It reflects human limits. Law enforcement agencies periodically revisited the file. Cold cases are not static. They are reviewed, re-examined, and recontextualized as resources allow. In Brandon Lawson's case, these reviews did not produce a breakthrough during the early cold case years. They reaffirmed what was already known and highlighted what was missing. The absence of suspects remained consistent. No publicly confirmed individuals were identified as responsible for Brandon's disappearance. This absence did not point to innocence or guilt. It pointed to lack of evidence. Investigators could not advance claims without support. The case remained grounded in restraint. For the broader public, the length of the case altered perception. What initially seemed like a mystery that might resolve quickly became an example of how disappearance can persist without explanation. The narrow window of time that defined the night of August 8 to 9, 2013, stood in contrast to the years that followed. A short span of uncertainty expanded into a long duration of not knowing. This expansion affected how the case was discussed. Early conversations often focus on immediate possibilities. Later conversations shift toward endurance. How long has it been? What has changed? What remains unanswered? The focus moves from action to persistence. Throughout this period, the case remained unresolved. Brandon Lawson was still officially missing. His status had not changed. There was no confirmed discovery of remains, no definitive explanation. The absence that began on Highway 277 extended forward through time. This phase of the case illustrates a reality that is difficult to convey in summaries. Cold cases are not inactive because they lack importance. They are inactive because they lack direction. Investigators do not stop caring. They stop finding new ground to cover. For Brandon Lawson's case, the cold case years were defined by this stasis. The investigation existed in a state of readiness rather than motion. It awaited something outside the original frame, a development not contained within the initial facts. That development would not come quickly. It would not arrive in the form of a tip that resolved everything. It would come much later through a process unrelated to the early searches and theories. But during these years, that future was unknown. What was known remained constant. Brandon Lawson disappeared after placing a 911 call. His truck was found abandoned on Highway 277. No confirmed sightings followed. Searches did not locate him. Years passed. The emotional weight of this period is often acknowledged, but rarely detailed in official records. What can be stated factually is that the case persisted. It did not close. It did not resolve. It waited. Waiting is not a dramatic state. It does not produce headlines. It produces silence. Silence broken occasionally by reminders that the questions are still there. For the community around Bronte, the case became part of local history, a story referenced rather than discussed daily. For investigators, it became a file that remained open, reviewed, and preserved. For Brandon's family, it remained unfinished. This unfinished quality defines the cold case phase. It is not defined by action, but by continuity without resolution. It is the longest phase in many investigations and the least visible. By the time nearly a decade had passed, the case had endured longer in absence than it had existed in urgency. The night of the disappearance remained sharply defined. The years that followed blurred together. And then, after years of waiting, something changed. But until that moment arrived, the case of Brandon Lawson remained suspended in time. Not forgotten, not solved, simply unresolved.
The change did not arrive with sudden clarity. It arrived quietly, years after the night on Highway 277 had settled into memory. For most of the case's history, there had been nothing new to add. The known facts stayed in place, and the unanswered questions remained unanswered. Then, in February of 2022, something emerged that altered the status of the case, even if it did not resolve every uncertainty. Human remains were discovered in the area connected to the long-standing search for Brandon Lawson. The discovery itself was not immediately framed as a conclusion. In cases that have remained unresolved for years, new evidence is approached carefully. Identification takes time. Confirmation requires methodical work. At the moment the remains were found, they represented possibility rather than certainty. This discovery marked the first significant physical development since 2013. For nearly 9 years, the case had existed without any confirmed trace of Brandon beyond the abandoned pickup truck and the unclear 911 call. The appearance of remains shifted the investigation from absence to presence, even if that presence could not yet be named. The process that followed was forensic and procedural. Identification through DNA does not move quickly, especially when remains are discovered long after a disappearance. Samples must be collected, comparisons must be made, results must be verified. Each step carries its own timeline, and none of them produce immediate answers. During this period, the case existed in a suspended state once again. The possibility that the remains belonged to Brandon was acknowledged, but not confirmed. Public statements remained cautious. Investigators could not declare resolution without certainty. For the family and the community, this waiting echoed earlier years, though the nature of the waiting had changed. In December of 2024, confirmation arrived. DNA testing identified the remains as belonging to Brandon Lawson. This identification formally ended the missing person phase of the case. Brandon was no longer classified as missing. His identity was confirmed. A question that had persisted for more than a decade was answered. This moment carried weight because of its simplicity. The confirmation did not explain how Brandon died. It did not reconstruct his movements after the truck was found. It did not resolve the unclear elements of the 911 call. But it did establish one critical fact: Brandon Lawson had been found. In many cases, identification brings with it a cascade of explanations. In this case, it did not. The discovery of remains answered the question of where Brandon ultimately ended up, but it did not answer how he got there or what happened in the moments that followed his disappearance. The resolution was partial. This distinction matters. The breakthrough in this case was not a revelation of motive, method, or sequence. It was the confirmation of identity. It closed one chapter while leaving others open. It transformed the case without simplifying it. The abandoned pickup truck on Highway 277 remained central even after this development. Its role did not disappear with the identification of remains. Instead, it gained new context. The truck continued to represent the last confirmed point where Brandon was known to be alive and present. The distance between that location and where the remains were eventually found became part of the broader unanswered question. Investigators now had two fixed points instead of one. The truck in 2013, the remains discovered in 2022 and identified in 2024. What lay between those points remained unclear. The passage of time did not erase that gap. It made it more visible. The identification also reframed public understanding of the case. For years, the disappearance had existed in a category that implies uncertainty without endpoint. With confirmation, that uncertainty changed form. Brandon was no longer missing, he was deceased. This shift brought a different kind of finality, even without full explanation. From an investigative perspective, the case did not suddenly reopen in a dramatic way. The identification provided closure on identity, not on circumstances. There was no announcement of suspects, no declaration of cause that could be publicly confirmed. The case did not transform into a solved homicide or a clearly defined accident. It remained complex. Theories that had circulated during the cold case years were not validated or invalidated by the identification alone. Without additional evidence tied directly to the cause or manner of death, speculation could not be elevated to conclusion. Investigators remained bound by what the evidence supported. What changed most clearly was the timeline of the case. The period between 2013 and 2024 was no longer an unbroken stretch of absence. It now contained a point of discovery and a point of confirmation. These dates became new anchors in the narrative. February 2022, December 2024. Each marked a step toward partial resolution. The emotional impact of identification is often discussed, but it is rarely simple. Official records do not detail personal responses. What can be stated factually is that identification ends certain forms of uncertainty while leaving others intact. It replaces one set of questions with another. For the community around Bronte and the broader public that had followed the case, the confirmation answered a question that had lingered for more than a decade. Where is Brandon Lawson? The answer was no longer unknown, but the circumstances of his disappearance remained unresolved. This outcome reflects a reality that many long-running cases share. Resolution does not always arrive as a complete narrative. Sometimes it arrives as a confirmation that closes one door while leaving others closed behind it. The role of time is central here. The length of the case influenced what could be recovered and what could not. Physical evidence degrades, context fades. Even when remains are found, the ability to reconstruct events diminishes with each passing year. This is not a failure of investigation. It is a limitation of reality. The discovery and identification also reinforced the importance of restraint in earlier stages of the case. Throughout the years when theories circulated, investigators did not publicly commit to explanations that could not be supported. This restraint preserved the integrity of the case, allowing identification to stand on its own rather than being forced into a preconceived narrative. In retrospect, the truck on Highway 277 remains the clearest image from the beginning of the case. It is the place where Brandon was last confirmed alive. It is the location where the timeline fractured. Even after identification, it remains the point that raises the most questions. The breakthrough did not shift attention away from that highway. It returned attention to it, now with a different understanding. Brandon's disappearance was not permanent. His absence was not endless. But the story of how he moved from that roadside to his final location remains incomplete. This incomplete resolution is difficult to categorize. The case is no longer unsolved in the sense of identity. It is unresolved in the sense of explanation. These distinctions matter when evaluating what justice or closure means in different contexts. For law enforcement, the identification represented the successful conclusion of a long effort to determine Brandon's fate. For those seeking understanding, It marked the boundary of what could be known with certainty. Beyond that boundary, evidence does not currently reach. The narrative angle of silent evidence becomes most visible here. For years, the evidence said nothing new. Then, quietly, it spoke, not loudly, not with answers to every question, but clearly enough to confirm identity. The vanishing point that defined the case in 2013 shifted forward in time. The disappearance was no longer open-ended. It had an endpoint, even if that endpoint did not illuminate the path that led to it. In long-form reflection, this phase of the case stands as both an ending and a continuation. It ends the question of whether Brandon Lawson would ever be found. It continues the question of what happened during the narrow window that began with a 911 call and ended with an empty truck on a rural highway. The identification does not diminish the mystery. It changes its shape, it grounds it. It removes the possibility that Brandon simply vanished without trace forever. It replaces that possibility with confirmed loss. This transformation carries its own quiet weight. The case no longer asks where Brandon is. It asks how his disappearance unfolded and why it could not be fully understood. Those questions remain. But one thing is now fixed beyond doubt. Brandon Lawson's story did not end in disappearance. It ended in discovery years later after long silence. That silence, broken at last, does not resolve everything. But it matters. The road where Brandon Lawson was last seen did not change after his identification. U.S. Highway 277 continued to run through Coke County as it always had, carrying traffic past open land and quiet stretches that do not announce their history. What changed was not the place, but the meaning attached to it. The case that began there no longer existed in a state of pure uncertainty. It had moved into a quieter, more complicated form of closure. By the end of 2024, one question that had lingered since August of 2013 was no longer unanswered. Brandon Lawson had been found. His identity had been confirmed through DNA. The status of the case shifted from missing to deceased. This change brought a measure of finality, but it did not rewrite the past. The events that unfolded on the night of his disappearance remained as limited and unresolved as they had always been. In many narratives, discovery marks the end. In reality, discovery often marks a transition. For Brandon's case, it closed the question of where he ultimately was, while leaving open the questions of how and why. These questions are not rhetorical. They remain grounded in the same fixed points that have defined the case from the beginning. The abandoned pickup truck on Highway 277 remains one of those points. It is still the last confirmed location where Brandon was known to be alive. That fact has not shifted with time or identification. The truck remains a physical marker of interruption, a place where movement stopped and uncertainty began. Even now, it anchors the timeline more firmly than any other detail. The 911 call continues to exist in the record in the same form it always has. It confirms distress. It confirms timing. It does not confirm cause or sequence. Its unclear portions remain unclear. Identification did not alter that reality. The call remains a fragment rather than a full account. Together, these elements define the shape of the case as it stands now. A confirmed identity, a confirmed disappearance, an unresolved path between them. For the community near Bronte, the identification provided a form of closure that is difficult to measure. Small communities carry unresolved cases differently than large cities. They become part of shared memory. The confirmation of Brandon's fate answered a question that had been quietly present for years. It replaced uncertainty with certainty, even if that certainty came with loss. For investigators, the case stands as an example of both persistence and limitation. The work did not end when early searches failed. It continued through years of review, preservation, and readiness. The eventual identification underscores the importance of maintaining cases even when progress seems impossible. At the same time, it highlights the limits of what investigation can recover after long periods of time. Time remains the most influential force in this story. It narrowed the initial window of disappearance into a few critical hours. Then it expanded that window outward into more than a decade of unanswered questions. Finally, it delivered an answer that resolved identity while leaving circumstance untouched. This arc is not unusual in long-running cases, but it is often misunderstood. Closure is not a single event. It is a series of realizations. Some questions will be answered, others will not. The presence of an answer does not erase the absence of explanation. In reflecting on Brandon Lawson's case, it is important to resist the urge to fill gaps with narrative. The facts do not support a complete reconstruction of his final movements. They support restraint. They support acknowledgement of what is known and what remains beyond reach. What is known is this. On the night of August 8th to 9th, 2013, Brandon Lawson was traveling near Bronte, Texas. He placed a 911 call requesting assistance. His pickup truck was found abandoned on Highway 277. He was not present when officers arrived. No confirmed sightings followed. Years later, his remains were discovered and identified through DNA. What remains unknown is how Brandon moved from the roadside to where he was eventually found. What happened in the narrow window between the call and the arrival of law enforcement? Whether any additional factors influenced his disappearance? These questions remain unanswered not because they were ignored, but because evidence did not survive time. The narrative angles that have guided this case still apply at its conclusion. The vanishing point remains fixed on that highway. The silent evidence spoke only after years of waiting, and even then, it spoke in a limited way. It confirmed identity. It did not narrate events. This silence is not failure. It is a characteristic of reality. Not every story concludes with clarity. Some conclude with confirmation and uncertainty existing side by side. For listeners and readers, the challenge is to accept this coexistence, to recognize that resolution does not always look like explanation. Sometimes it looks like knowing who was lost, even if how they were lost remains unclear. The case of Brandon Lawson now occupies a different place in memory. It is no longer defined by the question of whether he will be found. It is defined by the acknowledgement that he was found, and by the understanding that some aspects of his disappearance may never be fully understood. This understanding does not diminish the significance of the case, it deepens it. It shifts focus from speculation to reflection, from searching for answers that may not exist to honoring the reality of what does. The highway remains quiet, the land remains open. These elements have not changed. What has changed is the weight they carry. They are no longer symbols of endless absence. They are markers of a life interrupted and a story that reached partial closure after long silence. In long-form reflection, the case invites a broader perspective. It reminds us that disappearance is not always dramatic in its unfolding. It can be sudden, quiet, and complete within a short span of time. Its consequences, however, unfold slowly over years, affecting families, communities, and those tasked with seeking answers. The identification of Brandon Lawson does not close the conversation, it reframes it. It allows for mourning without waiting. It allows for memory to settle without constant uncertainty. It allows the case to move from open-ended mystery to documented loss. This reframing is significant. It changes how the story is told and how it is heard. It replaces speculation with acknowledgement. It grounds the narrative in what can be confirmed. At the same time, it preserves the unanswered questions as questions, rather than forcing them into conclusions. This preservation is respectful. It aligns with the facts. It honors the boundaries of what evidence can support. As the case now stands, it serves as a reminder of the quiet complexity that often defines real-world investigations. Not every disappearance leads to discovery. Not every discovery leads to explanation, but each carries meaning. Brandon Lawson's story began with a brief call and an empty truck on a rural highway. It continued through years of silence and waiting. It reached a form of closure through identification, and it remains, in part, unresolved. That unresolved quality does not diminish the truth of what is known. It underscores it. It reminds us that certainty and uncertainty often exist together, especially when time has passed and evidence is limited. In the end, the case does not demand an answer it cannot provide. It asks for recognition. Recognition of a life. Recognition of loss. Recognition of the limits of understanding. The highway where it began continues on. Traffic passes. The landscape remains unchanged. The story, however, has reached its final shape. Not a solution, but a conclusion.